There was a famous saying that first appeared towards the end of World War I in 1918 that went, "English soldiers fight for honor, French soldiers fight for glory, but American soldiers fight for souvenirs." It was certainly well known that in both World Wars, US troops led all others in acquiring war trophies, and in particular the acquisition of German and Japanese weapons. The most prized in both World Wars was of course the Luger pistol, and any visit to a US gun show or auction will demonstrate just how many so-called veteran bringbacks proliferate today. However, collecting firearms as trophies wasn't quite the free-for-all it is often portrayed as being, and British troops found different rules in doing the same as their American comrades. Prior to 1944, GIs were not restricted in the acquisition of trophy firearms, though a prohibition was in place against the importation of machine guns by US soldiers, so most weapon trophy hunting was restricted to pistols and rifles. Such weapons were simply stuffed into kit bags and brought home, or even mailed home in the military postal system, and of course a few machine guns certainly came through, some of the popular models being the MP40 and the very late war MP44 assault rifle. US troops were exposed to millions of enemy firearms found on battlefields or collected from prisoners of war or found during searches of buildings, vehicles and so on. Due to the sheer numbers of German and Italian firearms that were being captured, the US Department of Defense introduced a system called capture papers in early 1944 designed to control the type and number of firearms being sent home. The GI was now supposed to have a certificate issued by his commanding officer giving him official permission to have the weapon and to take it to the US in person or send it by post, passing US customs. The problem was capture papers were easily obtained or even falsified, and no one really cared, as the US had some of the most liberal laws on firearms ownership anyway. The government realized that capture papers were ineffective, and shortly after the German surrender, a new US Army regulation came into force on the 28th of May 1945, limiting war trophy firearms to only one gun per soldier, and completely prohibiting the importation of machine guns. This regulation was largely ignored by all ranks, including the officers who were supposed to enforce it. After years of bloody fighting, the issue of war trophy firearms probably looked quite unimportant, and most thought it reasonable for soldiers to take such trophies as a small reward for all the hardships and dangers they had faced. With the shipping home of millions of troops at war's end came hundreds of thousands of handguns, rifles, and a few machine guns, along with helmets, bayonets, flags, swords, medals, and all sorts of Nazi memorabilia. For the British soldier, the situation was quite different. Britain had, and still of course has, much more restrictive rules regarding gun ownership, so British troops were not at liberty to bring pistols and rifles into the country. Units could bring them in as regimental souvenirs, and most officers' and sergeants' messes in the UK today have deactivated trophy guns of World War I and II vintage hanging on walls. But for the individual, to be caught in possession of an unlicensed firearm was a serious offence. This had been the case since 1937, when a Firearms Act made certification mandatory of pistols and rifles, but not of shotguns, which could be owned without any form of licence. Of course, soldiers did pick up or acquire pistols in the course of fighting the war, and British troops were just as attracted to Lugers as Americans, but there was no system of capture papers for Tommy Atkins. Many were smuggled into the country by using military transport vehicles and so on, but soldiers' kit bags were searched by Royal Military Police as they came off troop ships in the UK, and if found in possession of a nice shiny Luger or similar, that soldier would be in extremely hot water. However, pistols do turn up now and then in the effects of deceased veterans who just couldn't resist bringing one home. In the decades after the war, local police forces regularly launched gun amnesties to allow people to turn in unregistered firearms without fear of prosecution, and these do occasionally turn up World War I and II bringbacks, including some quite valuable guns. However, be warned, hanging on to World War II bringbacks in the UK is severely frowned upon. Of course, in the United States, the rules are completely different. As I understand it, automatic weapons are indeed regulated, and a lady recently handed in a World War II German MP-44 assault rifle. In the war in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, the same rules applied to US and British troops. However, the most prized souvenir weapon in this theatre wasn't necessarily a firearm, but it was the Japanese samurai sword, and there were no restrictions in the US or Britain about bringing home edge weapons. Hence, in both countries, auction houses and antique shops are often full of long and short Japanese swords or Arasaka bayonets, liberated from dead Japanese soldiers or surrendered at war's end. American troops and some British were also quite interested in the Japanese Luger, as it's been nicknamed, the Nambu Type 14 pistol, and also plenty of Arasaka rifles were brought into the US. But such weapons remained rare in Britain due to the same stringent rules governing trophy guns as for the North African, Italian, and Northwest European campaigns. Now, in all of this, I haven't mentioned our major ally, the Soviet Union. Did Red Army troops keep weapons as souvenirs? Well, probably. But I do believe that the acquisition and the retention of any Nazi-marked equipment or firearms was severely frowned upon in a police state such as the Soviet Union. And indeed, you had to be careful of running afoul of the local political commissar, the NKVD, for holding on to such equipment. I believe that on the Russian front, most German weapons were gathered up and placed into storage by the Soviets, and probably an awful lot of it still remains in storage today. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.